Cool. Well, hello there. Thank you for joining us today on our Discord to celebrate World Creativity and Innovation Week. I'm Zina Rahman. I'm a creative technologist and strategist. I'm also head of strategic development here at Transitional Forms, and we're a studio lab that has a mission and a passion to connect artificial intelligence and culture to create the next wave of dynamic entertainment. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of creativity in the development of artificial intelligence, and as well as the interplay between art, technology, and storytelling in the development and production of Animo, and as well as the slate of other products that we are developing here at Transitional Forms. Before we get started, I would like to encourage questions. I don't know if that will happen today. And as well, I'd like to introduce my friends and colleagues, Dante Camarena, who leads up our technology arm, and as well as Nick Counter, who is our art director. Perfect. Dante, Nick, do you want to introduce yourselves? Who are you and what do you do? Uh, Nick, do you want to kick things
I'll go
off?
first. Right. I'm Nick Counter. I'm the art director at Transitional Forms. I've been here kind of since the beginning when we were working with the NFB on our first prototype of our first short film. And that was actually my first chance encounter with machine learning, and ever since, been very excited about it. Also very scared of it. My job is mainly just, having the most basic understanding of machine learning and making it look more fun and colorful and stuff around that. But yeah, how about you, Dante?
I'm Dante. How can I say this? I have a background in education and then uh, transferred over to computer science and programming. All around kind of new tech kind of guy. Did a bunch of VR work for like too long, I think. And eventually got roped into this AI thing, which I think is great because did a bunch of AI in my undergrad with Costa Drapanis and Tim McInerney. But yeah, now been working at TF for like the last 4 or 5 years, and it's been really cool. We get to explore some of the most cutting edge kind of like tech, and then boil it down in a really kind of approachable way, which I think is very close to my ethos. So I love it.
I like the word approachable, which I think is a nice undertone of how we're going to explore the technology and the underpinnings of Animo and all the stuff that we're working on at large. So why don't we just jump right in? Let's talk about Animo first, since that's really the focus of today. Um, Nick, what is Animo and who is it for?
So, Animo is a kind of like our latest endeavor into getting general audiences to train machine learning. We worked on our first project, which was Agents, where we did all of the training of the machine learning characters in our short film, and learned a lot from that. And through the excitement kind of that we had when like coming to work every morning and seeing the agents trained overnight and what they've done or not done or how weird they've become, we kind of like basically wanted to give that excitement and also that opportunity to everyone, because there's something really special about machine learning versus traditional game AI, and like having a relationship with the AI. So basically, Animo is a game that we're working on that's going to be coming out early next year, where uh, general audiences, uh, who knows the ages, 12 and up, I would say, basic understanding of math, can basically start and create a new agent, and basically what are called Animo, which are little machine learning characters. And every Animo starts as a blank slate, and through rewarding them and discouraging them to take different actions, you get to train a new personality over time. So training takes a lot of patience and play, just like I guess like if you have a dog or anything like that. But it's also extremely rewarding over time, because like when you see something go from knowing nothing and being completely confused to like starting to begin to create a personality, you feel a lot of pride. At least I do. So basically, Animo is us creating a little game around the idea of training these agents.
It's funny you ask like who is it for, because if I can answer that question honestly, it's for Nick and Pietro. When we were working on agents, it was like, oh wow, we have to train all these like AI models, and I was like, oh man, this is actually quite an intuitive process, and it doesn't feel very like technical. Like there's a lot of like jargon, but like ultimately, kind of a lot of creativity kind of comes up. It's like, oh, what situation do I put these little creatures in? What do they want? What are their desires? What do they love? And really, the like that felt like something that shouldn't be kind of gate kept by technologists. I know Alex and I were like kind of and yeah, like we were kind of like working on that kind of entirely, but the desire was to share it with a larger part of our team, and we tried to simplify it, and then we were like, we can simplify this even further to the point where we're like, we can probably make this for a general audience. So now we might have bitten off more than we can chew, but it seems like we're getting there. So
So it was kind of born out of the idea that it's not just technology based challenges that we were exploring, but out of creative design problems and creative needs that informed the building of something that's for a broader audience, which I think is kind of interesting. It takes a lot of different lenses to be able to determine that, which is kind of cool. So let's take it back because you've mentioned that we worked on some other projects that helped inform Animo. So, which is, I guess, Agents, our interactive dynamic film. Nick, do you want to expand on what were the learnings from Agents and how did that inform the broader idea around developing Animo?
Yeah, totally. So agents, since we were training, we Dante was training
Alex.
the AI, and Alex, our previous programmer, were training the AI often overnight. So like leaving the computer on, getting really hot in the studio, and just hoping like fiddling with knobs and hoping like some cool dynamic behavior would come out. We got that to work in the end, and we were able to like get some very intriguing um, agents to like interact with each other, interact with the world, and do all sorts of things. So basically, there was a ton of learning from that. Mainly, like I said, training overnight is absolutely not something a general audience will ever do.
It's also not
Um,
sustainable, right? Like
it's a ridiculous amount of energy for whatever behavior that you're trying to get. And so trying to figure out how to bring that amount of training down so that people can actually like train in a few minutes, train different behaviors. The other big learning that we had in agents is so agents took place on a very. I can share a quick screenshot of basically the diagram of how how agents works. Agents worked with several machine learning characters on top of kind of a spinning globe where they had to maintain themselves and like kind of create behavior on that while trying not to fall off while the globe is kind of spinning. So it's an extremely difficult environment. So what we did in agents is um, we were, and Dante, you can talk a bit more about this in detail if we want to, but we were monitoring so many different observations. Like what an agent saw in while training is like they were trying to calculate the rotation of the world, trying to calculate where others are, trying to cooperate and kind of creating a simple space. And then the whole point of agents was we were asking the player to interact with the world a bit, which added a whole another complication of how do the agents interact with the player and respond. So an extremely complicated situation that I think worked really well, but also really kind of inspired us in for Animo, just like the simplicity or the actually not the simplicity, the actually the difficulty of that environment combined with not as many things to do uh, almost was a restriction on the behaviors that the agents could learn. So the team moving into Animo was like, how can we make a simple environment with a diverse set of actions and diverse set of kind of like items and interactable things, so that we basically can inspire the machine learning to have like a much like more kind of robust or like almost unlimited set of behaviors. So that was like a lot of the inspiration going forward from agents. And so, yeah,
A lot of
basically,
the
oh
oh,
yeah, go ahead.
a lot of the work in kind of new tech often boils down to finding, hey, what has like the newest tech been able to do? Okay, what's a simpler version of that that we can hack together to get to get it to do something cool? And Animo is very based on mechanically it tries to emulate the simplicity of the Atari test suite. Because we already see RL algorithms being very good at like old Atari games. So initially, when Nick and I were discussing, kind of like, okay, well, can we make an Atari game that we can then kind of blow up in 3D to make it accessible to like the user and like try to tell stories there. So we ended up designing like a set of rules that kind of mimicked an Atari game. If you look at Animo, that kind of grid-like style, it's actually like a 2D. It's actually the way that the AI sees it, that they see it like a 2D top-down Atari game. So in that sense, we tried to go all the way back from like 3D gravity, multiple like agents physics, like high definition, like really fast kind of like decision making, to kind of like a slow, like almost Tron, like something you'd find in like an arcade in the 80s. But then trying to show you like, hey, these are not the dumb AI, like the dumb NPCs that you see in like 80s games, but these are like smart, and they learn, and they can basically deliver it. And you combine that with the fact that we're basically making like a Tamagotchi, and it's like a full wave of nostalgia for like delivering on the digital pets of the past. But this time they're actually kind of, I don't want to say sentient, because like the whole ML community will like jump on my butt, but like that's that's they're a lot smarter than the Tamagotchis. I'll tell you that.
Well, it's only a matter of time, if I can say so. But I like the fact that we touched on environment, because it's true. There was a simplicity with a complexity in some of those older designs within games. And I've heard Nick say a rich environment can create rich behavior. Nick, can you expand on that and how that informed the design of Animo that we have today?
Totally. And like I think that that's not just something for machine learning. I think that's often the case in reality. Like if you look at the jungle, the jungle, like and think of like how like think of the most diverse kind of environments on the planet, like whether it's like in the ocean or in the jungle or something. It's like these things have a it's like they increase in complexity basically, because there's more and more challenges to be solved and more niches to fit in, and in all sorts of different levels. So like with Animo, using this kind of like Atari like simplicity of the game, like uh, those games can actually have incredible amounts of complexity, basically because um, while there might just be like an object on every like square or whatever, every object can interact with every other object in kind of a matrix that kind of creates an enormous amount of potential behavior. And the thing about that is like creating that world is really fun. Creating the matrix between all these different items is extremely fun. But what is super important about Animo is that like we can only train so many, and we can only predict basically like like we know how smart we've gotten them, and we've just started with it. But we really want like to open it up and make audiences like kind of test it out, because we don't know the limits to their intelligence. We know that they can use multiple items, they can distinguish things from the environment, all these different things, but really kind of outsourcing that is the most important part. So I kind of went on a tangent off of your environment idea, but that's what led me to.
Um, Dante, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think one thing that Nick touched on, which I think is really interesting, is um, it's not just the case in RL, but it's also the case in RL in real life. It's not just the case in reinforcement learning; it's also the case in real life. Uh, which is a lot of these, and this is obviously like a super simplification, and again, these are kind of heretical statements within the ML community. But we find that a lot of the lessons that we learn in using the reinforcement learning technology are lessons about ourselves as well, right? Like they're lessons about kind of some of the ways that our learning and our behavior gets kind of like pushed in a certain way. And yeah, and for example, having like a dull environment makes dull agents, right? And then you take those agents and you put them in an environment full of things they haven't seen, and then they're not gonna be that effective. So training an agent requires like exposing them to the right amount of complexity at the right time, which I think it's a good lesson for trying to teach things not just to AIs but also to humans. Is like little by little, like drip feeding them things. So environment design is very powerful. And to that sense, in agents, I know this is an Animo meeting, but we talk a lot about agents. In agents, I think like one of the best parts of the whole film is that the environment was crafted to tell a story. So the environment kind of enforced the storytelling in agents. And if we talk about kind of the way that so Transforms kind of runs on this idea of three-way authorship, and the whole point is that there's like a collaboration between like the director, like the producer of the experience, the AI, which has some agency, it has some like authorship, but then also the user, who the user kind of impacts the story in a certain way, and in this way it kind of becomes a dynamic experience. But being able to manage that space creatively is very difficult, because like all creative endeavors have like a certain degree of like wanting to kind of control or affect things, and as a player you want to kind of control or affect things. So in agents it was really an exercise of like and this was actually one of the most difficult, spoiler if you haven't played agents, one of the best ways to play agents is to interact just a little bit, because the more you interact the harder it gets for the agents. They don't know what to do. So exercising kind of that control on yourself, like exercise, or like that pacing limitation, so that you don't affect the environment too much, is very important in agents. And in Animo, it's actually us that has to show some restraint. Like we have to, as a studio, we have to be a lot more comfortable with only setting the stage for the stories that our users may want to tell. So in a way, like this whole the whole exercise between agents and Animo has been kind of towing the line of where the creative input of the player should be, where the creative input of us as like as a production company should be, and where would the creative input of the users, sorry, not the users, the AI come into play. Because like also these little guys, each one of them is different. Like anytime you initialize like a neural network, they have like completely random weights, and like we can talk about the definitions of creativity all like for all day, but like maybe there is something in there that has like, I don't know, an intention, and being able to work out that interplay is as much in the environment design as it is in the user interaction, as it is in what the AI wants to do intrinsically.
And to that point, like when actually like creatively designing a game for, say, machine learning, um, you're in a very dangerous like zone, because you can try to predict what they're capable of doing, but they might do it in a different way. So basically with Animo, it's like we want to get out of like kind of the realm of predicting exactly how smart they can be or what they can do, and we want to allow them through the environment, through the diversity, to like gain those behaviors over time. Yeah, just because like working with machine learning in general is it's always kind of well, at least from my experience as someone who doesn't actually work too deep with the machine learning, uh, it's always dangerous to like rely on a prediction of what it will be able to do, because it's never going to be at all
You
exactly
say that, Nick, but like working with, sorry, I just want to say working with Nick has been incredible, because Nick has such an intuitive understanding of how the AI models work. I'm not just saying that, like, trust me, like I would bash Nick all day, but in this one thing he's actually quite good. Not just with the RL, but we also have other projects that use other kinds of like AI, and just there is like, and that's a whole thing about AI, right? Like it's like as much as it is like a highly scientific, highly mathematical process, you're ultimately there's two things. One, you're feeding the AI data, and the curation of that data is it's an expressive action. But then there's for some of the models, there's also kind of, and in Animo, for example, it's the environment. So here, for example, this level, well, these levels were built by Nick, and for example, they have like a certain amount of expression built into them. Like they have a certain amount. Actually, no, they were built by Anush, I think. I don't know.
No, I built it.
You built them? Okay, cool. So they have a certain amount of expression within them. They have like there's an expression of challenge here, and like any level designer will tell you that like level design has like some inspiration behind it. But then also with some of our conversational AI, like there's elements that you need to put into the algorithm to get something out. There's like this sense of garbage in, garbage out in the AI community, where if you don't provide good inputs, you're gonna get bad outputs. So there's a lot of that, but then there's a second element that's not just providing data, but there's also like interacting with AI, and kind of that's actually and one of the I think the greatest successes of Animo so far. I mean, we haven't even finished the whole project, but just getting to the point where like seeing the users of this application being able to say, oh, I think the AI works this way, and sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they're right, but just that process of trying to understand the way that the AI does things, like these little like models like execute, to me it shows like a type of empathy, which is something that we're like quite keen on fostering. It's like there's this new technology that's insanely powerful in some ways. Here's a toy version of it, like a baby version of it that maybe is cute and cuddly, and you can maybe have empathy for it.
That's definitely interesting and great context. It does bring up a question that I think others may want to get some clarity on too. That going back to this context of ambiguity, right? We don't know what these agents can do, right? There could be varying outcomes, and when we look at things like from traditional level design, there are multiple paths forward, and therefore you can explore X amount of storylines and X amount of usability structures based on that. So when it comes to not knowing, and how do we uh, how do we go about that from a story perspective and a usability perspective, knowing that we won't always know what the agents will do? How does story kind of inform the structure or the journey on that, and how do we also um, inform that for the player through design?
Yeah, so with that, it's like we've gone like through many kind of different divergent paths trying to find like what's optimal for kind of like an Animo story and how to tell that. And I think like we've landed mainly in the fact that like we need to just prioritize learning. Like we need to prioritize creativity and play. And whenever the user is able to train like basically Animo who can play or have effective actions, interact with their environments in creative and new ways, then they get rewarded through all sorts of different things. There was lots of kind of like thinking of making it slightly more complex, but then it always kind of deterred from what is like the true meaning or the true kind of like thoughts behind Animo, which is like creative, uh, like uninhibited Animo. So I think also like we also at some point wanted to played with like putting our own kind of moral ideas on the Animo and then rewarding them for that. But then even we decided to backtrack from that. Like we had a lot of ideas of like, oh, like what if what if we encourage them to, plant trees more than cut down trees or do sorts of different things. Like but then I think it assigning a moral to the Animo is maybe not as important as letting them learn for themselves over time and create their own kind of system. Uh, so trying to always scale back and just really like highlight the kind of creative process that they're going through. and that the player is going through.
Oh,
I love that it's not that the story and the usability is leaning into that exploratory aspect of learning, and that we are celebrating the fact that we don't know what we don't know, and we're rewarding almost the player for not knowing what we don't know, which is kind of an interesting mechanic in this kind of space. um,
if you don't mind,
um,
I think that there is a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, I think there is uh, an interesting like parallel. Even though the story in Animo is not explicit, it's there is an implicit story within each of the Animo that you train. If we look at a lot of the kind of story frameworks that drive like what's called modern narrative, there is often like an idea of betterment. There's an idea of like the evolution of a character, and in a sense, these little guys are characters, and they do have their kind of they have their challenges they have to overcome. Some of them may run into into a mentor that like maybe you're the mentor, right? And in doing so, often they land into like traps. They land into behaviors that are unproductive and kind of lead them down the wrong path. And hopefully, in the best circumstances, you eventually see these like Animo succeed. And that micro story, even though it's not as explicit as kind of like an overarching story, is itself very powerful. It's like the story of my guy, like this guy's what's this guy called, Marsha, but like
This is
this
Sneak. This is
Sneaky.
one of our smartest Animo a year ago, and he was pretty smart.
But like watching Sneaky grow is its own story. Our narratologist called it like nachas, which is like the I think it's a Yiddish word for the pride that you see in something carrying out your legacy, and that is a very human kind of like story to tell. It's like how to teach like these like nimble small creatures and what to do when they succeed, and the feeling of kind of watching that happen or the feeling of watching them fail. And all of those are kind of micro stories that we'll try as much as possible to augment in the full game.
And I think that that also comes down to like this a bigger issue that we're currently working through, which is that machine learning. Like I said, it's like it's always hard to predict what they're going to do because all of a sudden they might do something that you don't know what they did, or something could go wrong and you don't know why. And so that's like a big kind of that's a lot of our effort going into like the second half of production for Animo. I can show like a quick video. So this was Sneaky. I trained Sneaky to use what's called the block maker to collect these little goals, these little flags. This is in a prototype from last year. And so over time, I was able to easily, like, no problem, Sneaky is going around making blocks, not falling off the edge, and collecting and winning every single time. So doing super well. The next step from that was, I think, what I called Sneaky Beast Mode was when I trained Sneaky to uh, not only use the block maker, but also use the axe, which can destroy blocks. So that's Sneaky being able to navigate their environment, not fall off, not die, also use multiple different items to achieve its goals. So in this one, I've created this kind of more complicated environment where it doesn't have any immediate rewards. So it learned how to basically use the block maker when it needed to get across the gaps, switch to an axe, and then also start hammering away at the environment to collect everything. Like when this happened, I screamed. Like I couldn't believe how smart it was because I didn't know if it was possible. And this was only after like a little bit of training. And so, but the sad part is, which is what we're working on, is eventually I overtrained Sneaky, and I don't know what happened, but basically, um, Sneaky, I think, became paralyzed with fear. He would no longer pick up items. He would just look aimlessly at the goal, like on the edge. And I had no idea what had gone wrong with him. Like, I think I trained it to be too scared of the edge or something, but I don't know. And so that kind of like development of like Sneaky got super smart, and then I did something wrong and basically traumatized it.
Sneaky
So
burned out, man. like
I think he
went
just
too hard.
burned out.
It's like
Burnt out. Yeah.
collected too many goals.
And that in itself, to Dante's point, is the story arc for these for the Animo, which we do track. But also at the same time, we're developing tools to figure out what happened to Sneaky. So, like, how can you fix him?
So,
Is he a lost
so
cause?
there's storyline and then there's character development, right? There's the intended mission within the space, but there's also your character and it's self-realization, actualization in the world. How did we, from a design perspective, approach that character development? Is it that we see how these characters grow and then we give them that character, that personality beforehand, or is that an emergent personality? And how do we nurture that in the game? How does someone kind of connect to that? Because when we say something like a Tamagotchi, I have empathy towards that Tamagotchi. I have feelings. I have an emotion. I wanted to, like as you said, you screamed with joy when Sneaky did so much, but you also felt when Sneaky was burnt out. So how did we approach sort of the character development aspect of these agents? And what are our expectations going into releasing the game into the wild? How do we want people to experience these characters and the type of relationships that they have with them?
So it's interesting because there's a parallel in child rearing. Like you have all the expectations of what your child will become, but as they grow, they kind of surprise you. Sometimes they have interesting quirks, or sometimes they have like particular interests. And to the degree, and this is kind of a choice that the player has, is like, do you want to keep enforcing a specific approach, or do you want to kind of like buy into the way that your agent is currently doing things? Maybe your agent is naturally good at certain things, and you're trying to force it to like do another thing. Uh, in and to be fair, like a lot of our work is trying to use the medium of video games that has established like tropes and established kind of like mechanics to accentuate some of these very difficult to kind of um, share like experiences. So it, for example, we're looking into ways in which you can customize your Animo cosmetically, and we're not tying that to the way that the Animo like acts. We're trying to make sure that that part is completely up to you. So and there's actually an interesting element of interpretation in that you get to interpret the way that the animal is behaving and then assign like a cosmetic to that. But on the other hand, we're also, and I don't know if this will make it into final, but we're also working on a way to evaluate the behavior of an agent and say, well, your agent is kind of risky, or your agent is kind of like paranoid, or your agent is kind of like overactive, and then give you these descriptors. So we're doing both the prescriptivist and kind of this like kind of liberal approach where it's like, hey, here's what your agent is according to our metrics, but like also what do you want your agent to be? Maybe you put like bear claws on it and make it look very like, but like, or maybe you want to give it, I don't know, like a tiara and make it very like dainty. And like if your dainty agent is the one that's like chopping down all the other agents, then there's a story in there too. So there's something freeing about that, I think.
And so a lot of the learning came from agents in the first place, which is like it's communicating weird graphs and stuff that are happening in the background that Dante knows a lot more about than I do. And then basically kind of like figuring out what's important to the audience for to empathize with the Animo, and how can we convert the math to represent maybe say emotion through their faces. In this version that I showed before, they don't have faces, but in the current prototype they do. They react to basically if they're enjoying doing something, if they're lost. Like how can we find these feelings and make them express it through both their faces and their animation and also their story. So kind of like finding a way to communicate requires us to like actually really kind of do an MRI kind of on their brains, see like actually how are they working. Is like there's a lot of personification involved, but then there's also kind of a lot that it gives us. Like we can tell if an animal's stressed or doesn't know what to do. Like there's a lot of like tools in place that we can kind of like you know glue to more human like emotions.
Um, I want to also touch a little bit on the technology arm of this, the whole training process, because we did mention that that was one of the challenges and one of the learnings from agents, right? Dante, can you tell us a little bit about how we explored reinforcement learning in the game, how we humanized it, and that whole training experience? How did we find that baseline, that sweet spot between not having to wait overnight for something to happen, but to have a form of uh, I don't want to use the word instant, but some sort of reaction or gratification that makes the audience, that makes the player want to continue training an agent.
So this is, first of all, we couldn't have done this at all without Unity's ML agents. Their Barracuda, like we've moved away from using ML agents inside Unity, but their Barracuda plugin is extremely useful. So I guess big shout out to Unity for that. It allows like efficient like use of AI in games. So like kudos. But on a more kind of like theoretical level, on like how did we go from training overnight to training in just like in like a minute or 2 minutes? Um, it comes down to two things, or well, it comes down to three things. The first thing is that in the field is discrete, and what that means is like it's turn based. If anyone's played like tactics RPGs or like Into the Breach, there's like cells, and the agents can move into cells, and that makes it a much simpler to kind of convert everything that's happening around the agents into kind of like into numbers, into like a observation vector. And doing that is like that's half the battle. Like being able to reduce the number of observations that an agent can see, and not only that, but like going from like a very kind of like a in agents, like the speed of the world is a number between 0 and 1, but in Animo, if there's an axe on the floor, that's a 1 or a 0. So going from like kind of like floating point to decimal numbers into like integers like 1 or 0, it's so much faster to train. And then the other part is the second element is that the actions that the agents take are also discrete. So the observations are discrete, and then the actions that the agents take, they can only take one of 6 actions. They can move left, they can turn left, they can turn right, they can walk forward, they can grab an item, or they can use an item, or they can wait. That's it. That's all the actions they can take. And as Nick was saying, and we basically I don't usually have a controller on hand to kind of show that, but like we mapped it on an NES controller. Like, what are all the what are all the actions that you have on an NES controller? You have your D-pad and you have your A and B button. Like that's it. So being able to kind of reduce it again to that makes it a lot simpler than kind of having to manage kind of like the vector that you're moving in agents. And then finally the last bit is that it's really slow. And when I say that, it's like it's really slow for the AI. So when you're seeing kind of the agents kind of take a step forward, it's like, oh, it takes it like half a second to take a step forward. Great. And that's good for us because in the background, when you're training, we actually run this at 100 times speed. So so while you're seeing your little agent like try to solve the level, in its dreams, and we're trying to figure out how to best visualize it, but in its dreams, it's imagining doing that 100 times over, and it's learning that like it's doing it over and over and over again and failing, and the simplicity of like the computational simplicity of the environment we've created allows us to ramp up that multiplier like a lot. So I think and we're working on making that even faster. Actually today I was able to run like the upgraded training simulation, and we went from being able to run like 30 executions within like of a turn within a real turn, and now we can run like 70 executions of a turn within a real turn, which is amazing. And just those kind of like iterative improvements, all like they're multiplicative. So the AI trains faster, we can simulate the simulations faster, and and it's just like they're smaller networks, and all of these together kind of chip away and end up in a really small training time. Now, I'll be honest, if you want to train complex behavior, sometimes like even in Animo, you have to leave them training for like an hour or like 20 minutes. So there's like there's still quite a bit of waiting for some of the more complex behavior, but we the important part is to kind of give the users that first dose to because collecting crystals you can train in like or like collecting those goals that you saw in the thing you can train in like a minute. But if we can get to the point where like players are like, oh, I can train them to do anything and I can kind of understand how to do it, then we can ask the players to invest, like, yeah, leave your computer on for like an hour and come back and see what it can do. And once they do that, it's like, holy moly, they can build bridges and cut down like stacks and all that, like all the stuff you saw. So yeah.
And to that point, the training isn't just dependent on how many times they do it. It depends on the environment that they're put in, and the depends on the rewards you give them. We've trained agents with like a single reward, just as like the other day we had like a goal, like a little goal, one of those flags behind a bunch of trees and an axe there, and we didn't tell the agent to use the axe. We didn't tell it anything about trees, but over time it was able to it figured out what to do just on a simple idea. So the diversity of ways you can kind of instruct your Animo also really affects the time, and that's why we really want people to play it, because that's stuff that only a community can figure out. It's not something that we can figure out on our own.
I
And
want
that's
to
actually,
see the Animo speed run like
yeah,
that.
yeah, what are the rewards? What's the optimal Animo? Yeah.
I mean, it's a game, but it has so many different types of applications or use cases, right? Like you can visualize research, you can visualize a whole bunch of other, um, you know, spectrums of this kind of work and this type of technology. What do you want players to feel after playing this game? Let's get into the feels here. But what do you want people? Because we've got a beta coming out right in the summer. We're releasing next year, and we put all this love and energy into it. What is what do you want people to what do you want them to leave with? What is the experience that you want people to
I
feel?
personally want them to feel the loss of overtraining an Animo, because it's devastating.
It is.
But it's personal. Like it's like really it's and but it shows like how actually like invested you can get with these characters. Like it takes time to train them. It takes a lot of like effort and like parenting. It's like, and when something goes bad, like it's upsetting. And I think that that's a good sign. Um, that's my main thing.
I think this company was started with the idea of human machine empathy, and that's still it. Like let me be completely transparent. I mean, I 80% know how these things work. Like they're just matrices. They're numbers multiplying with numbers, and then getting put through a system that like updates those numbers. They're just numbers. They're just digits. But within those numbers, within those patterns, there's like a being and understanding how that like not understanding. Like I don't care if users have any idea about matrices or linear algebra or any of that crap. But like getting a sense of what AI can be and like what that learning process is, and then understanding the limitations, like not expecting too much out of this new technology, and then also being and then being pleasantly surprised when when the technology over delivers, like that scales beyond just these little toy like robots, right? Like it scales to the entire AI landscape we live in. So if we can achieve like empathy between like humans and AI, I think we're on our way to preventing like the whole Terminator scenario. So
Yeah.
When an Animo, oops, sorry. I was gonna say, when an Animo has an epiphany, which is often how it learns, it's one of the most exciting things. Like you'll watch it struggle and struggle, and then all of a sudden you'll just be like, it just gets it. It like it just clicks in its mind and it can do things like that's like it's the most rewarding feeling. It's so rewarding. At least for me.
Yeah, and there's that's such a like what a time to be alive where for many years technology has been this thing of utility where now we're being asked to teach it, to be empathetic towards it, to nurture it, and these ideas of very human emotions being applied to a space that we haven't had that kind of lexicon or those types of discussions before, not at least in this way en masse. So I feel like this is Animo is going to be a really interesting experience for a lot of people to be able to explore those emotions when it comes to artificial intelligence. I want to ask the team: does anyone have any questions? Coming down to the hour, any questions?
Awesome.
No. Mulan, did you have any questions for us? You always have good questions for us.
I have a general question about how do more people get involved with AI, um, both from a technical and an artistic perspective, to create their own experiences?
I think personally, like I think the AI kind of is existing like all around us at all times right now, like in almost every application we use and everything we search. And I think we have in general, kind of an illiteracy that is building, that is like kind of like failing to catch up with actually the reality of how influential and important machine learning is. So I think like any kind of opportunity, like Animo or anything, any kind of product or app that can, um, you know, increase machine learning literacy on any level is really important, especially if you can like bring it down to like younger audiences. Even if they don't get the math, the matrices, whatever, if they get the positive, negative rewards, if they see the how things struggle, like I think that in itself is um, inspiring for like creators or future developers or basically even non-creators, non-developers, just people in general who interact with this stuff all the time and don't even know it.
My advice to technical aspirants is just uh, well, two things. One, don't be kind of surprised if things are too much. Like there's all like AI can at least in terms of like tooling can get very difficult. There can be quite a bit of things to set up, but and I'm not trying to give a negative thing. The positive thing here is like there's 1,000 tutorials like on how to do a specific thing. I think one of the coolest things that we currently have access to is what's called Colab, as well as Jupyter like notebooks that are like step by step. Here is how you do this. Like run this function, run this other thing. Like and you'll be surprised just how much power is just available there, and the GPUs are online. They're completely available, like to be used by like amateurs, and it's very important if you want to do like self-expression. Um, you don't need to make it a platform. You don't need to make it a service. You don't need to make it like scalable. Just go try something. Like have fun. From an artistic perspective, like similarly, that's also available to you. Like I understand that the barriers are much higher. Like but I mean, get at it, man. Like the tutorials are step by step, and often maybe reach out to a friend to help if you can. Some interesting people to follow if you're interested in AI art is Janelle Shane. I think she goes by Janelle Shane on Twitter. Janelle C. Shane on Twitter, and yeah, she has like a wonderful AI art blog that kind of illustrates 1,000 different ways to kind of use AI in an artistic way, and often posts instructions on how to replicate her work. There's also the AI art festival that is coming up in like a couple of months that I think she'll be like at, and also other people. Luba, oh man, I forget her last name. But check out the AI Art Festival. It's also a great place to kind of get involved with that. And the last person I think I'd like to, you know what? I think that's good. I think those are kind of two. If you follow them and then kind of follow the people they're following, you'll get so much expo. And of course, follow us. Like we try to retweet or reblog all sorts of interesting AI art, but like definitely, like I guess the lesson here is get involved with the community. There's so many resources. There's so many people like eager to help you that it's the clunkiness of the tools can be overcome with friendship.
And also, I guess, mindset, right? Like there's this idea that artificial intelligence is scary, machine learning is scary. You need to know code, you need to know certain tools. Where now we live in a world where there's a lot of different ways to experience AI, right? We've got like looking at even GPT-3, um, having playground being accessible to anyone, be it if you are creative or if you have a coding background. So there's a lot of ways of making that first layer contact in expressing yourself with AI being a paintbrush or a tool. And then from there, whatever that is for you, because it is to me, it's been an artistic pursuit as well, a creative pursuit. And from that, there you can establish baselines as to what you want to explore from that. One of my early conversations with Dante when I first started here at Transitional Forms was around that, where I didn't know as much as I do now. And it was that, well, how do I learn more? And you break it down into pieces and you start understanding where your interests lie, because it is a paintbrush, it is a tool, you can do anything with it. So what is it that you want to do with it? And from that comes all these potentials of interacting with these models, and then you decide the types of skills that you need to inform the rest of that pursuit or whatever that objective is. So it's a pleasure to work with you, Dante, Nick, the whole team, to be able to explore AI together, different applications, and how to change the world with it. So we're coming down to the wire, down to the last few minutes. Pietro, did you have any thoughts, feedback, questions? I just put you on the spot, so maybe not. Or anyone else.
Well, don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe, I guess. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, yeah,
What
no,
I'm trying to say
definitely.
is
I think we should do.
we will be releasing an alpha, or we'll be looking for beta testers or alpha testers. We'll be looking for people to help test Animo. Like, I know we already have like a prototype out, but like we've been working really hard on the new version. There's going to be updated visuals. There's going to be an updated UI. There's going to be an updating like training engine. There's going to be so many things to just do the exact same thing, but like better. And we hope that you'll like. If you're interested, just like feel free to reach out to Warrior Zina, or even Don. Actually, Don's in the call. They both anyone with a blue label is basically on the Transform team here on Discord. If you're watching this not on Discord, join our Discord. Like I'm sure it'll be linked in the doobly doo wherever we post this. Um, we're actively looking for alpha testers. We're gonna move into a beta phase soon as well. So that even if you don't make it into the alpha and it's been like a month since this came out, like the beta element might be really good too. So all in all, like what I'm saying is like you reach out, like if whoever's watching this, if you're not part of TF, like come hang out, because we'd be interested in sharing more of this with you.
Yeah, to add to that, join us on our Discord, which you probably are here already. Our socials, which is Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, transforms.ai. We also have a wonderful dynamic animated show that lives on Twitch, which we stream on a weekly basis. We're trying to find a cadence on that, but it's absolutely insane, super hilarious. It is fully autonomous, happening in real time, and it's called transforms.tv. So that's another thing to plug in. And as Dante mentioned, we are openly looking for beta testers, as we do have one coming out this summer, and we plan to be releasing Animo later on this year. However, if you just want to try it right away, you can check out our itch.io, and we'll link out to that as well, to test the initial Animal Lab, which was the concept from where all of this has been born from, and where we've been able to inspire this beautiful discussion today. I want to thank Dante, Nick, for joining us. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And again, if you have any questions, you know where to find us.
Yo, and big shout
Thank
out
you.
to the TF team, like Anuj,
Yeah.
Manal, like Alex, Reese. Like I know I'm forgetting a lot of people, but they all worked on Animo, and I'm sure
Yeah,
their work is extremely important to getting this through.
absolutely. Teamwork makes the dream work. I had to drop a little cheesy bit there. That's what it is. Anywho, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll catch you at the next one. Take care. Bye.